What is there in a flower that so attracts us? Is it beauty? Is it fragrance? Is it color? Is it size? Sri Aurobindo did not write a lot about flowers, except in Savitri, and only occasionally in Savitri. But what he writes is so beautiful. And so the theme of my talk today is flowers are the moment's representation. And it comes from a comment of Sri Aurobindo. It seems that someone wrote to him about the portulaca, the moss rose, which is a very ubiquitous flower. It grows almost any place in the summer in many, many colors, and it's a low ground cover, beautiful flower, but it doesn't last long during the day. It opens late in the morning, and by afternoon it's closed. So this disciple asked Sri Aurobindo, why does your flower close so quickly? Well, the flower's name is Sri Aurobindo's compassion. Sri Aurobindo replies to him, my compassion does not wither with its symbol. And so the title of my talk today is his continuation of that line. And he says, flowers are the moment's representation of things that are in themselves eternal. So we have that feeling of eternity when we see a flower. We know that it may die. We also know that its seeds will come up the next year. Or if it's a perennial, it will live year after year. Or if it's a tree, it will live for perhaps 100 years or more. And we do have trees, I can speak of the redwoods in America, that are many, many hundreds of years old. The banyan trees, very long-lived trees. So what attracts us truly to a flower? Well, we know the flower attracts bees, it attracts butterflies, it attracts other insects. And once I wrote to Mother about these insects, these sort of nasty fellows that were eating our garden every year. And I said, Mother, is there an intentional hostility from insects towards plants? Because they are eating everything we grow in the nursery. And Mother said, no, it's not like that. You see, insects do good and they do bad. And she said, it's not a conscious thing. For example, insects pollinate fruit trees. They pollinate our vegetables. They pollinate so many different things. And that's the good part. So the bad part is that they eat everything also. So how do we control that almost voracious appetite when grasshoppers land and they destroy everything? We have seen it many times, wiping out hundreds of acres of wheat. The secret is balance. Keep the insect population balanced. Don't let it get too wild and populate too many so that it can be so destructive. But man is even more destructive. He's cutting the trees of the Amazon. He's cutting the Himalayas. He's polluting the rivers, polluting the oceans. I have seen in Tulum, which is now a big tourist place. I've seen just behind Tulum thousands and thousands of cubic meters of waste piled high like a mountain. We have to look into these things, and we have to change our ways of life. Look at the filth we see in India. Plastic bags. I watch a man every morning taking his little bucket of garbage out of his house and dumping it on the street. Education is the only way to get over this. We have to educate people. But let's really get into flowers now. That was my pulpit speech. Now we look at the book of flowers, which Mother named Flowers and Their Messages. In the beginning of this book, we have compiled almost everything that Mother has said about flowers and plants. But the first page is the title of my talk. Flowers are the moment's representation of things that are in themselves eternal. So we would ask Mother so many questions. How to develop our consciousness in order to work in a better way with plants and flowers. And what is Mother's response? First, you must learn to be silent. Then note carefully what happens in the consciousness. That's such a vast statement, such a wide statement. Oh. So we asked Mother many questions, and she would answer all of them. She would say, plants have feelings. They are alive. They should not be treated brutally. Mother was not in favor of this kind of creating balls and creating animals out of plants. She was against all of this manipulation of the plant. She says, as a rule, plants suffer if they are kept shut up in a room. That is why when we bring plants into a house, we should give them plenty of light so that they can survive. Otherwise, they won't make it. Now, Mother speaks about plants that even have vanity. We have a plant called greed for money. We have another plant called vanity, another one called pride. So we asked Mother, why these negative significances? And Mother said, that plant takes upon itself to purify the problem. How beautiful. That a plant that doesn't have a mind, but has a consciousness, can purify things like that in the atmosphere. Once in the ashram, I think probably many of you have been to the ashram. Has anyone not been to the ashram? Okay, you all have been. And you have seen there the service tree. Mother named it Service, and it's blooming now. It's a beautiful tree. But one day, when Mother gave me the work of caring for it for the rest of my life, I saw that the branches were bending a little low. And I wrote to Mother and I said, they want to cut these branches, but I don't think it should be done. I don't feel it should be done. And Mother wrote back, they must learn to bow their heads. Well, Mother said, when the lake is completed around the Matrimandir, all that soil will build a mountain. And on that mountain we should plant fir trees. Because when we plant fir trees, these little creatures come to take care of those trees, and they need snow. And Mother said there will be snow in Auroville. It may not last long, but there will be snow in Auroville when the mountain is completed. It's already quite huge, and we haven't done even 10% of the lake. Okay, so let's take a look at when plants fall ill. Why do plants fall ill, and what can we do to help them? Oh, Mother makes a strong comment here. When man does not meddle, the illness of plants seems to be accidental. But man's action has upset the life of plants, even as that of animals, of course. Men have upset the life of plants and animals, and supermen have upset the life of men. Whoa. We see this great disparity, this great distance between us, human beings, and the animals. And Mother said that difference will be even greater from the supermental beings to man. You almost can't grasp it with the mind. So, Mother has asked the following question. Can I remove the branches of shrubs which are overhanging and causing inconvenience to the inmates? Mother writes, and this is so important to me, and I'll talk to you about it. I cannot say yes or no, as all depends on the way it is done. It is not only the welfare of the inmates that must be taken in consideration, but also the welfare of the shrubs. How beautiful. When we prune a plant, on completion, it should seem as if we were never there. We don't use cutties, machetes. We use the right tool at the right moment. It may need a sécateur, a small branch, only that big. It may be larger, and we may need a lopper. And if it's even larger, we will need a small saw. So we always use the tool adjusted to the plant. And the tools have a consciousness also. We should clean them after we use them. We should sharpen them when necessary. Even the tools in our kitchens, they all have a consciousness. Everything is in motion. Everything. This looks like a table, but it's just atoms moving around quite slowly that have formed this. When we begin to understand that, we see that we too are just a composition of atoms and perhaps 90% water, as they say. So plants have feelings, and I want to carry on a little because Mother says, I do not like clipped and trimmed plants. It looks too artificial. And then she says this most important thing. The only thing I insist upon is care, gentleness, and consideration, as you would have for a living being. For plants are living, and they feel and suffer. Now, Tompkins and Bird, many years ago, wrote a book called The Secret Life of Plants. If you have not read it, I strongly recommend that you do so. They made many experiments, and all of them proved out. For example, they would have a philodendron, a house plant, on a long rectangular table. And then they would bring shrimp and put them in boiling water. And they would attach electrodes to the plant, and they would see how the plant shook the moment the shrimp went into the boiling water. Plants feel things happening to other creatures also. My contact with plants and flowers is now 70 years since I began work with my father and learned how to amend soil, improve soil, learned how to compost, learned how to design in the Japanese way. Because Mother told us the Matrimandya garden, she said, naturally will be done in the Japanese way. I have not seen it as yet, and it will all have to be redone. Because Mother was very clear when she spoke to me. She said to me, and many of you have heard this before, but you could hear it again. It must be a thing of great beauty, of such a beauty that when men enter, they will say, "Ah, this is it." And they will experience physically and concretely the significance of each garden. In the garden of youth, they will know youth. In the garden of bliss, they will know bliss, and so forth. Then Mother raises her hand and shows me from here. She begins in a spiral, and she says to me, one must know how to move from consciousness to consciousness. Then she says to me, I have chosen all the flowers. And then in addition, she says to me, I would like you to begin with the Garden of Unity. Now that says an awful lot, because there was no unity and there has not been any unity in Auroville for a long time. And I think the disparity now is even greater. We have to find a collective harmony, a harmony that is so powerful that nothing negative can touch it. When we do that, Auroville will move ahead rapidly. What can man do? Mother says nothing depends on human beings in the building of Auroville. Then what does it depend on? It depends on the divine. If we can unite with the divine, even beginning to unite with the divine, then we will help accelerate the process. That's about all we can do, or sometimes slow it down. Well, Mother says, when a plant is tired or sick, give it rest for a few days in a proper place, and it will recover. Repotting is always a blow, and to give a blow to a sick plant is just the way of finishing it. You see, Mother knew everything, and she could teach us everything on every level. She says, in preparing the beds, flower beds, it may be found necessary to cut away some roots of the trees. Mother says, this is not possible. Whoa. No roots of trees must be cut. Apart from that, if the trees are respected, you can prepare these beds. So clear. Many years ago, there used to be an area just behind the Samadhi where everyone would sit for the collective meditations. And the roots of the service tree were protruding out. So they asked me, can we do anything? And I said, yes, but it will be a big work. We dug out the soil as far as we could and gently moved those roots down without sacrificing one root and then covering them up. And they haven't come back since in the last 20 years. It can be done, and it must be done with consciousness. Everything we do in life should be done with consciousness. But especially when we're dealing with plants and animals, of course, we have to have an understanding that we should not interfere in their lives. We can help them. We can help them grow. We can give them the proper fertilizers, the correct amount of water, the correct amount of sunlight and shade. But when we work with animals, they become very attached to us. And we become attached to them. And that is a problem. Because that attachment disturbs the natural resistance and knowledge of an animal. A human being can give an animal poison weeds and it will eat them. But it will never do that if it's left alone in the fields. It will always pick out the edible things and never the poisonous things. So we go on. Yesterday I took out a considerable quantity of soil to see if any worm was at its root. If you like, I will now take out the whole lump of roots and inspect it. Mother says, there would be no use in doing that. Besides, plants must not be disturbed too much. Like people, they need quiet to get strength and grow. This gives us a totally different vision of flowers and plants and how we have to work with them. Because we can and are creating new plants every day through hybridization. And hybridization is not a negative word, as many people may think it is. Basically, if you would like to improve a species, you have to do two things. You have to find a male plant that is stronger than all the others around, and a female plant that is stronger than all the plants around, and you cross them, just like insects or flies or anything would pollinate them. The hibiscus is a very good plant to start with because all the reproductive parts are clearly visible. And you just take the pollen from the male plant and dust it onto the stigmatic surface of what will be the female plant, and that's it. Pollen goes down through the tube, goes into the ovaries, and eventually seed will form.
Can I ask?
Yes.
It is when it was bud or when it flower?
No, the flower has to be in perfect bloom. The pollen should never be too young because they won't open and the pollen grains are very, very small. They come out of the anthers. But when the pollen grains begin to fade or get old, then they don't have that power anymore. So you have to catch it just at the right time. Are there subtle beings that are in an intimate relation with flowers? Mother says that is possible, even probable. Why does she say that? There are children who have experienced this and related it. Children have told Mother that they have this contact. Is it possible to become conscious of these beings and work in harmony with them? Mother says, yes, it is a question of nurture and capacity. Now, it's very interesting. In Ireland, there was a fine poet. His name was A.E., George William Russell. And he was a mystic and a poet. Interestingly, he had the vision also of these subtle beings. And he would walk in the late afternoon, early evening with his wife down a lane, and she couldn't see anything, but he would say, you see, this little fellow is taking care of this plant, and this one is taking care of another plant. And he would tell her all of these beautiful fairies. And you know, we have 2 people in the ashram who see the fairies. See them very, very clearly. One has even photographed one. I'm not going to mention names, Muncie. They'll be flocking to their door. I don't want that. So, is it possible to develop this capacity, and how to do it? Mother, certainly one can develop the capacity if one takes sufficient interest in this to put in the time and necessary effort. Naturally, it will be more or less difficult according to each one's nature. To become conscious of one's dreams helps to do this. A silent and still concentration helps also. The flowers have taught me so much as I work with them year after year after year. And when I walk in the garden, it's a garden that I made in northern Georgia, about an hour and a half north of Atlanta, and it's called Mother's Garden. When I walk in Mother's Garden, I speak to the flowers, and they speak to me. And it's a beautiful language. It's not a language that I can tell you it's in English or anything like that, because their language is different. They communicate differently. They can smile. They can feel sadness. They can feel pain and difficulty. And I remember when I was building the Matrimandia Gardens nursery, there was a plant in the shade that would call to me all the time. It wanted much more sun. When I gave it more sun, it blossomed so beautifully. We have to make this contact with plants very, very deeply, very intensively. Let them know that we love them. Let them know that we cherish them. After all, there's even a great importance in weeds, because the weed is not just a plant out of place in a garden, but the weed also covers the earth. Without them, we would have only deserts. Respect the weeds, because the weeds are the progenitors of all the science of Ayurveda and homeopathy. That's how it all began. And now there are cures for almost everything in Ayurveda and to some extent in homeopathy. Okay, this was my question on the insects. Are there forces directly hostile to vegetal nature? Are insects a manifestation of these forces? Mother writes, there do not seem to exist forces consciously and voluntarily hostile to the vegetal kingdom. Insects do harm because they feed on plants, but in this way they serve them also. Both things are there, good and bad, without any conscious will. They do good, they do harm, without knowing it. Back to Mother's Garden. Many people come very often just to meditate in the garden. And it's such a beautiful thing, and everyone is welcome. Well, I do see people starting to leave, so let me wind this up. And thank you all for coming. Flowers are the moment's representation of things that are in themselves eternal. Sri Aurobindo. He also speaks to us about the rose and its beauty and its perfection. And my last little story is about my beloved Parichand, who was the ashram gardener for many, many years. And there's an entire book of his with Mother answering his questions and scolding him at times about not doing things right. Well, Parichand wanted to grow roses, fine roses, hybrid roses. And he would bring 50 roses in every year, and they would all die. He would try it again the next year, and they would all die, because the climate was so difficult for them in the summer. So he went to Mother. He says, Mother, I'm going to give it up. Mother said, you must keep trying until it gets into the consciousness of the plant that it can make it here. So when I would plant in the Matrimanya nursery, I would say, if I can make it here, you can make it here. Namaste all.